Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Shelley Fold-Nasso, CEO of the National Coalition for Cancer Survivorship, and our webinar today is on amplifying your message using traditional media. I'm really thrilled and honored to have Michael Holtz here as our special guest speaker. Michael is an 11-year survivor of stage 3B rectal cancer. Since his diagnosis in March 2012, he's been a passionate advocate for cancer patients, survivors, and caregivers. He's a 2023 ambassador for Fight Colorectal Cancer and is a member of the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network's National Advocacy Team. He previously was ACSCAN's State Lead Ambassador for Tennessee, and he received ACSCAN's highest honor, the Volunteer Award for Excellence in Advocacy, in September 2021, and was named a State Lead Ambassador of the Year in 2019. In his professional life, Michael is Senior Communications Specialist for Oak Ridge Associated Universities, where he hosts 2 company podcasts and leads the organization's media relations and website content development. Previously, he worked for ACSCAN for 12 years. He's the author of It's Not Harder Than Cancer, The Mindsets You Need to Survive and Thrive After Serious Illness. He's a speaker, writer, frequent media guest, and blogger at michaelholtzonline.com. He lives in Knoxville, Tennessee, with the lovely Sarah, his wife of 26 years, and their rescue dog, a golden basset named Marley. And most importantly for us, he is one of our dear CPAT members who, some of you who attended our symposium last year, heard him talk a little bit about media advocacy. And he has so much wealth of knowledge and experience in this area that we asked him to expand on that and make it a full webinar. So I am thrilled to have you, Michael. Thank you so much for your time and all of the dedication you put into putting this webinar together. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Shelley, so much. I am thrilled to be here and honored to share what I know and hopefully help everyone be able to amplify their individual messages and their organizational messages, as the case may be. So I want to talk about amplifying your message, basically advocating through traditional media channels. And Shelley has shared a little bit of my background, so I'm not going to cover all of that again, but where I wanted to talk about my experience being relevant to the topic is when I worked for ACSCAN, I was the Regional Media Advocacy Director for the southern region of ACSCAN at the time. So I covered 14 states, from Delaware to Florida and from the East Coast to Arkansas, which meant 14 states with 14 different legislative agendas, plus the federal agenda. And so using the media and helping our volunteers and helping advocates tell their story through traditional media, but also to each other and to lawmakers was really important to me. So I have a huge passion for helping people find their story and then being able to share that story with others, as I hope you'll see through the presentation today. So I have 4 objectives for today. One is to understand what media advocacy is. The second is to understand how it works. Hopefully you will understand how to amplify your message. And then I've got some tactics and tricks to help you put what you learn into practice. And ultimately, the reason that we're talking about media advocacy today is so that all advocates who are coming to NCCS CPAT Hill Day in June will be prepared to amplify that message. However, if you are not a member of CPAT, if you're not coming to Hill Day, you're an advocate for cancer wherever you live, hopefully this information will benefit you in the communities and the states and the regions where you live. So let's start with laying the foundation. What is media advocacy? Essentially, it's the strategic use of mass media. In this case, we're talking about television, radio, newspaper, and their digital counterparts to advance public health priorities. We are not talking today about social media until the end. That is intentional because I want to focus on using traditional media channels as a means of amplifying your message. So what media advocacy does is it allows groups and individuals to tell their stories in their own words to promote social change. In context, But what media advocacy does is it takes individual health crises. In my case, as an 11-year cancer survivor, I can use my story to translate that story into advancing public policy change and advancing social issues. So it allows groups like NCCS to work constructively through the media to change the context in which the individual health crisis occurs. So as you'll see, we're talking about advancing a specific policy through Congress. How do our stories impact that piece of policy? And we'll get to it in a moment, but how do our stories impact that? How does it help elevate and amplify why this particular piece of legislation is important? So the question is, do people still use mass media? We've been hearing for years that, newspapers are dead, TV news is dead, blah, blah, blah. Well, the fact of the matter is most American adults still get their news from the mass media, primarily through digital platforms, which would be, their websites and app counterparts to actual TV, radio, and newspapers. We are still using mass media on a regular basis. And then versus social media, in terms of news consumption, most people still get their news from some form of mass media. Social media has its ups and downs, but primarily people are still getting their news from traditional mass media, and again, their digital counterparts. The important thing is that decision makers pay attention to the media. This is why we talk about this in the first place. From elected leaders to elected local officials to members of Congress, they're all paying attention to the media. They like to see their name in print. In Congress, in particular, they have staffers who collect media clips and circulate them on a regular basis. And as advocates, I know you understand that phone calls, emails, meetings with elected officials are being counted to help understand how people are talking about and what issues people are talking about. Media clips work the same way. What are people talking about back home? And I want to share a story actually about the particular clip that I've added to this slide. So this was 2017, it was one of the early fights to overturn the Affordable Care Act, and I was invited by ACS-CAN to participate in a coalition wanting to talk to lawmakers about keeping the Affordable Care Act the way it was. So I flew to Washington, D.C. As it happened, Senator Lamar Alexander, who is from Blount County, which is the county next to Knox County where I live, we were on the same plane, basically going to the same place. And he was reading this article while I was getting on the plane. Now, he and I had met before, so he knew who I was, but I just kind of looked at him and waved and said, I'll be seeing you in DC. Well, as it happened, when we got off the plane, this was back in the days when you had to take a tram or a bus from Plainside to the terminal. And I managed to stand right next to him on the tram. And we talked about the Affordable Care Act on the tram to the terminal through security. So even before I had my official meeting with him, I had an unofficial meeting with him. So I just say that to say he knew I was coming. I had a meeting with him anyway, on my own. And then we had a meeting with him as a group of folks from Tennessee the following day. So you never know when something that you get in the media is going to be of service to your cause. So a couple of things about what media advocacy does and what it doesn't do. So media advocacy does help you gain access to the media. It allows you to frame the debate on your terms. Why are you talking about this? Why is this important to you and your organization? Whether it's the Affordable Care Act or the Comprehensive Cancer Survivorship Act, whatever it is, why are you talking about it? Why is it important to you? It helps you get the attention of decision makers and it helps you raise public awareness of your issue. There are likely people in your community. In fact, there are probably lots of people in your community who don't even know that in this case, the Comprehensive Cancer Survivorship Act is a thing. So we get to help make it a thing because we're not the only cancer survivors in our community that this legislation is going to benefit. What media advocacy doesn't do is it doesn't make lawmakers vote your way. Media advocacy doesn't stand alone. It's part of your larger campaign to have legislation get passed. So it is a tool in the toolbox, as they say. And media advocacy by itself doesn't make lawmakers vote the way you want them to vote. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the public is going to understand or appreciate what it is that you're talking about. But we still need to do it because there are problems, issues, and policies that we want to affect. And so when you're planning your messaging strategy, you want to ask 4 questions, essentially. What's the problem, issue, or policy that you're highlighting? Is there a solution? Who can make that solution possible? And then what do you need to do or say to get the attention of those who can make the solution happen? So let's look at that in the context of the Comprehensive Cancer Survivorship Act. So for those of us who are getting ready for CPAT Hill Day, what's the policy or issue or problem that we're highlighting? It's the Comprehensive Cancer Survivorship Act. The solution is legislation that focuses on coverage of cancer care planning and coordination, cancer survivorship, cancer survivor employment assistance grants, and adult cancer survivorship study. Now, these are just 3 elements of this particular piece of legislation. And we'll talk more about kind of focusing on these 3 pieces in a bit when we talk about a news release that's coming that all of us are going to be able to use in our communities. So who can make the solution possible? Every member of Congress. That's why we're having Hill Day in the first place. And then what do you need to do or say to get the attention of those who can make the solution possible? Potentially all or some of the tactics that I'm about to share with you. First, though, we want to talk about planning to tell your story. When we're advancing specific issues, policies, or legislation, it's important to talk about why this matters to you personally. So in my case, I'm an 11-year rectal cancer survivor. I'm grateful for the care and treatment that I received, but I know there's still so much to be learned about late and long-term effects of treatment. I'm living personally with a lot of effects of treatment, and some of them are just coming up now. So in my world, an adult cancer survivorship study would provide important data and insights to help survivors and their healthcare providers make important decisions about our care. So by supporting this study, we can help ensure that future survivors have access to the best care possible. So this is my story. I'm going to invite, I have one more thing before we get to, a couple things actually, before we get to more stories. You want to be able to tell your story quickly and concisely, right? So think about when you watch the news, short sound bites, right? So 30 seconds, 60 seconds, and 3 minutes. And you want to practice telling your story at 30 seconds, 60 seconds, and 3 minutes. And the differences are, by the way, these. So a 30-second soundbite is something that if someone puts a camera in your face and they've got literally, a 45-second spot in the news to tell your story, you're going to get 30 seconds of it to talk about why your story is important. What are you going to say in about 70 words? A 60-second soundbite is about twice that. A 3-minute interview would be if you got the opportunity, like I did here for No Shave November, to sit down in studio and do an interview about, in this case, why No Shave November was important to me. It would be, in this case, why the Comprehensive Cancer Survivorship Act is important to you. And be able to do that in about 3 minutes. And the folks at NCCS are going to have available for you, and we'll talk about this again at the end, but a storytelling worksheet to help you really step by step put together your story to be able to talk about why the Comprehensive Cancer Survivorship Act is important to you. And this worksheet walks you through all of the steps and being able to tell your story concisely and really quickly. So again, you can get the most impact out of your story when sharing it with the media. And now I have Veronika first and then Haley to share their stories with you so you can get another example of folks sharing their story. So Veronika.
Thank you, Michael. So I put together a 30-second bite, what it would look like with my story about the study. So you can compare how Michael talked about the study compared to how I'm going to talk about the study. And also know that not everyone's story is going to sound the same. And that's perfect because everyone has a unique story.
Right?
Yeah. So my 30-second clip looks like this. So I was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma a few days after my 25th birthday. This year, I am celebrating 10 years post-treatment, and I am grateful to be alive. I continue to experience, though, the long and late-term side effects of treatment. More research is needed to support the 18.1 million cancer survivors that are living longer than ever before. An adult cancer survivorship study would ensure that doctors have the information they need to better take care of survivors like me.
Awesome. Veronika, thank you very much. That was perfect and on point. Up next is Haley Smoot. Haley, thank you so much. And I have seen Haley's story. It will be a little bit longer, so consider Haley's story more of the in-studio interview sort of telling of her story. Haley, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. So I am going to talk about or share my story that will kind of illuminate the employee assistance piece of the legislation, and we'll try to keep it brief. I think it might be about a minute, maybe a little over. So my story is about my dad. So my dad was diagnosed with colon cancer in 2015 when my parents were living in rural Arkansas at the time. So my mom and I were my dad's primary caregivers, which of course comes with many challenges. But at the time I was living in Texas, which is about a 9-hour drive from rural Arkansas. So until my dad passed away in April 2017, I drove back and forth from Texas. Sometimes I'd have to leave in the middle of the night, right after work, and try to help in whatever way I could by attending his doctor appointments by phone, in person, whenever I could make the drive, etc. So my job at the time didn't allow employees to work from home at all. And my workplace didn't really encourage or help me fill out paperwork to take FMLA leave. So that wasn't an option for me. And I couldn't afford not to receive a paycheck or health insurance for 3 months. So I started experiencing health issues when my dad was sick, which of course I think was from the stress that my family was experiencing. So I needed health insurance for my own doctor appointments and had to use my sick leave or all of my sick leave when I had back surgery. So in the months before my dad passed away, it was also Texas legislative session, and my workplace wouldn't allow any employees, especially policy folks, to take any time off, even if you were sick. So my boss at the time made an exception so I could work from home for a few days at a time, which meant I was working on my laptop next to my dad's hospital bed. So it was, at the time, it was really challenging to remain employed, to remain focused and efficient while working, and still keep my job while my dad was receiving treatment for his cancer. So a lot of people have this issue, whether they're cancer survivors, caregivers, or families. And they experience these similar challenges and need the additional support while they're trying to take care of themselves and take care of their loved ones. So the Comprehensive Cancer Survivorship Act's employee assistance piece will provide support that people need, like transportation, psychosocial support, and financial assistance so that they can remain employed and financially stable. So thank you for letting me share my story.
Thank you, Haley. I appreciate it. So hopefully you've seen in the examples that you've heard, great, basically personal background for why the Comprehensive Cancer Survivorship Act is important to Veronika and to Haley and to myself. Different lengths, different information, lots of empathy and lots of understanding, at a personal level, why this legislation matters. You didn't hear, even really the name of the bill. There was no bill number. I understand there isn't a bill number yet, but that's down the road. So doesn't matter. Didn't hear a ton of statistics. What you heard were personal stories. Personal stories matter in the case of working with the media. So next, we're going to talk about specific tactics around your message. So you develop your message, you know what you want to talk about, you know what you want to say. So how do you put that into practice? So we're going to talk about news release, letter to the editor, an op-ed, an editorial board meeting, interviews, and then media event / news conference. So first up is a news release. And Veronika and Haley have worked on a news release. Shelley, I'm sure, has had input as well, for us as advocates to use. And this is what you're seeing on the screen is a draft of kind of a first pass at the news release. As we get closer to Hill Day, things will be updated. But this is something that, as I'll talk about at the end, you can expect to get from NCCS staff in advance of Hill Day to be prepared and to do some media outreach. So news release contains really the following 5 things. There's a powerful first paragraph. You want to keep sentences and paragraphs short and use plain language. Exactly as you would speak every day is how you want to write a news release if you are writing a news release on your own. Use quotes where possible, especially from an advocate. So you as an advocate want to talk about why is this important to you. And then finish with a tag or boilerplate. So for more information about the Comprehensive Cancer Survivorship Act, visit the National Coalition for Cancer Survivorship website at, and then you end with 3 hashtags, the 30 or end, just so the folks in the newsroom know that you have said all that you're going to say. They know you've reached the end of your news release. It's very old-fashioned, but it still works. Next is a letter to the editor. So this is the simplest and the easiest way to communicate your opinion to the general public and lawmakers. And again, this NCCS staff will have a Swiss cheese letter for us to use after CPAT Hill Day. My personal recommendation is to do it after, because it gives legs to the fact that you were in Washington, D.C. and that you met with your lawmakers about this issue. Now, your local newspaper is going to have different submission guidelines, but generally speaking, so I live in a community that has a daily newspaper and several weekly publications. I'm only submitting my letter to the editor to one of those publications. I don't want to broadcast it to everyone because it will hack everybody off if it gets printed in all of those publications. It's just the way it works. Word count is generally 250 to 300 words. Again, your newspaper may have different submission guidelines. And the editorial page editor or someone on the ed page staff is going to want to verify that the letter came from you. Even if it's the Swiss cheese version that NCCS has sent you and you're filling in the blanks, you still wrote the letter and you still sent it. They're going to ask you to verify your phone number, your email address, your home address, etc. They want to make sure that it came from you. So very important that you follow up on that request. An op-ed, again, another relatively simple way to get your opinion in front of the general public. Guidelines, again, will be different and available from your newspaper's website in all probability. You may want to, in advance of submitting or even drafting a letter asking the editorial page editor if they would be interested in publishing an op-ed on your topic. Word count is going to be a little longer, somewhere in the 700 to 800 word range. But again, your publication may have different guidelines. And again, you want to localize it. Why is this important to you? If you can find and identify key statistics from your state, numbers of cancer survivors, particularly in relation to this legislation in your state, in your community, etc., that's always a great thing to include if you can find them. Editorial board meetings, I actually had to ask because I haven't had one in a little while if editorial board meetings were still a thing. And they are, at least for my local publication. So this is an opportunity really to get in front of the opinion page editor, the editor of the newspaper, potentially the news editor, a reporter or two. Basically, it's a group of people from the newspaper that you're going to meet with to basically put your cause on the table. We have this issue that we're working to make happen. We want to, in this case, pass the Comprehensive Cancer Survivorship Act. We would love ultimately from this meeting for the newspaper to come out in support of the Comprehensive Cancer Survivorship Act. In addition to, of course, news coverage as like you're going to Washington, D.C. and all of those things. So call the editorial page editor and ask for a meeting, explaining your issue and why it's important. Hopefully they will see the importance of it and set a meeting for you. For that meeting, come armed with key facts, but again, you don't have to have a fusillade of information. You want the strong stories. If at some point we know that members of Congress are co-sponsors, or they're opposed, or they haven't committed, you want to have an idea of that as well, and then present your issue. As I said, there are going to be a number of people in the room: the editorial page editor, the news editor, reporters, etc. How many people are in that room really is at the discretion of the newspaper. Probably the editorial page editor, but it could be the editor, him or herself. And then once you've had a meeting, follow up, send a thank you note to everybody who attended. If you don't see an editorial in a few days, call the editorial page editor and ask if they need any additional information. Is an editorial forthcoming? Hopefully the answer is yes, and hopefully they may just be holding out for a piece of information or something may have come up that pushed the editorial that they're writing about your topic down the road a little bit. That is not a bad thing. It happens. Next is TV, radio. I need to slap newspaper in here as well, and podcast interviews. So these can again be longer form. They can be short form. It just depends on what you're pitching, but it's the opportunity to appear on the air or on TV or on the radio's air or on a podcast to talk about your issue. So pro tip, most TV stations have a general news email box. In the case of a couple of my stations, it's newstips@wbir.com or newsroom@wate.com. Almost always, this is on the news station's website. If you look under contacts, it will either mention contacting the newsroom or sending a press release. And this is the email box that they'll list. What is important to know about this is that everyone in the newsroom gets your email when you use this general email box. Now, it doesn't guarantee that you're going to get a response, but when you call to follow up, and you should always call to follow up, it gives you something to follow up on. So I sent an email with my news release on Wednesday, and I'm just asking, if you're interested, if I can give you more information, etc. if you're interested in appearing on a particular, what they call day part in the TV business, for example, so my ABC affiliate has morning news from 4:30 in the morning until 9 o'clock. They do a 1-hour noon news show, and then they're back on the air live from 3 until 6:30. They have a lot of news hole to fill. So my pitching an interview could potentially help them fill some time on the air. But there are different shows, right? So morning show is a little light and fluffy. News show is a little hard-edged, perhaps, but still has a little bit of, lifestyle-ish feature cast to it at the end. The 3 o'clock show on this particular channel is all sort of fun and fluff and lighthearted and lifestyle, decorating and charitable causes and events coming up in the community. A great opportunity to get on the air and talk about important causes like legislation. And then, the 4 o'clock to 6:30 is pretty hard news. And you just want to be prepared accordingly. If you're getting on, say, the 3 o'clock lifestyle show, you definitely want to make sure that you're focusing on the personal story, why this is important. The harder edge, hard news 4 o'clock show, you might actually call out a lawmaker and say, we're really hoping that Senator Blackburn supports this legislation. Be prepared for the interview using the storytelling worksheet that we talked about earlier, or just putting your own notes together. Make sure that you write out the most important things that you want to get across. If you have 3 minutes, what are the 3 things that you want to make sure that you get across during this interview? It's also important to know that you don't have to memorize what you're going to say. It is totally okay to hold your notes in your lap during the interview. Everybody does it. I've been on TV for 25 years. I still do it because you never know where your brain is going to go when you're in the middle of an interview, or if you catch someone out of the corner of your eye on, a feature-ish newscast that stops your brain from thinking about what you want to say. You want to make sure that you can get back to what you're there to talk about. Additional interview tips. Speak in a natural, audible tone. Avoid jargon and acronyms. State your message. Why are you here? Be concise. Totally okay to practice beforehand. I've had advocates tell me that they practice talking to their dog just so they have the opportunity to practice sharing their message. In terms of what to wear, don't wear black, white, or anything with small patterns. This is not the opportunity to, say, pull out that houndstooth jacket that you love so much, because it's going to look funky on TV. Always be sure to look at the interviewer, sit up straight, and remember that you are always on. So even if you're not actually on TV, the folks who are working for that TV station are paying attention to every word that you say. So make sure that you don't say something you don't want them to repeat at some point. Also, this picture is from a Zoom interview that I did somewhere during the middle of the pandemic. One of the great things, one of the silver linings to come out of the pandemic is everybody knows how to do Zoom interviews now. So even when you're in Washington, D.C., your home TV station theoretically could do an interview with you over your iPhone or your laptop from DC. So think about that as a potential pitch when you're thinking about reaching out to the media in advance of Hill Day. And I want to give a shout out to our own Sharon Rivera-Sanchez, who got a this news story on her TV station in Richmond, Virginia. And there is, as part of this story, which talks about her service to the community and how she serves cancer survivors in Richmond, she talks a little bit about the Comprehensive Cancer Survivorship Act. So she wraps her story around this important piece of legislation. We can all do this. So I just want to say great job to Sharon. The story is lovely. If you Google search it, it's beautiful, and you should definitely check it out. So now we're going to talk about media events. I'm going to tell you, I personally love a media event. This is an opportunity to do something in front of the media. So we do these a lot where I work at Oak Ridge Associated Universities. We have an event every year called Extreme Classroom Makeover, where we award a teacher within 50 miles of our office $25,000. And when that teacher finds out that they've won, we bring a big check and balloons, and hopefully the media to catch the surprise on the teacher's face. I realize that has nothing to do with advocacy, but I do this stuff a lot. So when I say I love me a media event, I love me a media event. What you want to make sure is that if you're doing an event, a press conference where people are speaking, that you have an agenda. Who is speaking about what and at what time? Your location should be convenient for the media. You don't want to do an event that's 20, 30 miles away from town, unless there's a reason for you to be doing it there. You want it to be convenient for the media to get there. The timing should be convenient for the media as well. Typically, somewhere in the 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. timeframe is best. Our last Extreme Classroom Makeover, which we did just a couple of weeks ago, was at 8 o'clock in the morning because it was convenient for the school. We still did the event. We didn't have media there, but we shot video and we took pictures and sent that to the media afterward. So if you have an event and media doesn't show, be aware that there are other uses. You can still use your event to get media attention after the event is over. Put together a media advisory several days to a week in advance, then send again the day before and call the morning of in terms of reaching out to the media. Have your materials, whether it's a news release, a fact sheet, whatever, ready for the media who are there. Allow time for interviews following any prepared remarks that you do. Ask reporters if they need more information, and then always send thank you notes afterward. So in terms of media events, again, as I said, I love them. They can be a crapshoot because your event is up against everything else that is happening that may or may not be newsworthy the day of your event. So in 2010, October 2010, I was working for ACS CAN. We were doing a National Breast and Cervical Cancer Early Detection Program funding event at the Alabama State House. Alabama does a decent job at the state level of funding their portion of the National Breast and Cervical Cancer Early Detection Program. They can always do better. We were pushing for them to add additional funding. What also happened at 10 o'clock in the morning on October 4th, 2010, was that the FBI raided the State House and arrested 11 people in conjunction with the bribery scandal. Guess what didn't get covered by the news at all for that day? The event was beautiful. We had a rally. We had tons of volunteers. We had signs. It was gorgeous. The weather was beautiful. Everything about the media event was perfect, but we got beat by the FBI raid. So all of that to say, you can do the best possible job putting a media event together. The events of the day can totally scrub any attempt that you make to plan a media event. Again, that's okay, especially in this day and age. Take pictures, shoot video, send it to this TV station, and give them information about why you have the media event. They still may use it. In the case of Extreme Classroom Makeover, 2 of our TV stations who did not show up for the event used the footage that we sent them to do stories later that day. So it still worked out. It was still technically a media event. It just wasn't, media just weren't live on hand to do the story. So some rules of the road for working with media. Just because you're doing something doesn't mean they have to care or give you space in their news hole or put you in there. They don't have to. But it pays to be kind. Always be kind to members of the media, even if they tell you no. It's okay. You'll get them next time. Maybe it's not a yes today, but in a week when you have something else or legislation is moving and the story has more legs, as they say, that may be the time to do it. And there is always, always, always a next time. So be ready for that. And then leverage your media clips. So the great thing about media clips is you have them to share on social media. The lifestyle show that I talked about airs at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I don't have any idea what their viewership is. I'm guessing because it's at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it's not huge. It's not as big as, say, the 6 o'clock news. But I now have a news clip that I can share on social media and give it a broader audience than I would have had if I just relied on folks watching that media, watching the news to see me on TV. So underpinning all of this is take the media clips and amplify them further on social media. The story that I have here actually happened last month. I asked Tirsa Smith, who is the morning anchor at our ABC affiliate, to get a colonoscopy as part of Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month. She agreed to do it as an advocacy story. And as it turns out, they found 2 precancerous polyps during her colonoscopy. So she now calls me her bestie. And it would have been 10 years before, because she did the Cologuard test, it would have been, and it wasn't caught in that test because of the types of polyps they were. It would have been 10 years before she had another colonoscopy, and who knows what would have happened with those polyps. So, in this case, she leveraged the clip, and of course I did as well. So I shared all of her social media posts. I shared the clip of both the interview I did with her the morning that her story aired, as well as the full story of her going through the process of getting the colonoscopy. So share your clips on social media, tag the media outlet and the reporter, thank them when you're sharing the clip. Great thing to do. They love to see that. And if it's specific legislation that you are advancing and working to get lawmaker support on, tag your lawmakers so they know, once again, you are paying attention to this issue. And you want them to know that this is happening in their community. So in terms of what happens next, as I promised, there are 3 things coming for advocates from NCCS. One is the storytelling worksheet. It's designed to tell your story in the context of the Comprehensive Cancer Survivorship Act. Use it to help yourself learn how to tell your story in those short sound bites, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, etc. There will also be a Swiss cheese news release to fill in the blanks with your information and a quote that you can pull from the storytelling worksheet. that you can then send to the media outlets in your community that you are going to Washington, D.C. as part of NCCS CPAT Hill Day. And then a Swiss cheese letter to the editor. Again, it's fill in the blanks, and you want to be sure to include the names of your lawmakers. I met with Senators Blackburn and Bill Hagerty and Representative Tim Burchett, or as I have been read in here, I met with the staff in the offices of, because we may very well meet with the staff instead of the lawmakers, but we want to make sure that those lawmaker names are in there because they're going to be looking for that. So here's your plan for NCCS CPAT Hill Day. Send the Swiss cheese news release to your news outlets 2 weeks to 10 days before you leave for DC. Pitch the idea of an interview with media outlets about your role at Hill Day and why the Comprehensive Cancer Survivorship Act is important to you. Use the storytelling worksheet to prepare for your interviews. Be open to the idea of being interviewed either before you go, while you're in DC, or when you get back. All of them are acceptable and effective. In March, I was in DC for Fight Colorectal Cancer's Call on Congress. And with one of my news outlets, I did an interview before and then when I came back, so that there was the discussion of the issues that we were talking about before. And then I had pictures and video of being in DC to share when I got back. So kind of 2 hits for the price of 1. And then after Hill Day, send your letter to the editor discussing your trip to DC that you met with your lawmakers to discuss the Comprehensive Cancer Survivorship Act. And that is everything I have. So thank you. And I think we're opening things up for questions.
Thank you, Michael. We have some questions that have come in, and I've got some questions of my own too. So I'm going to start with a few of my own. First, can you just talk a little bit about the difference between a media advisory and a press release?
Sure. So a media advisory is, in the context that I use them, I would use them to announce that I'm having an event. There is a press conference. There's a, we're doing something. We're holding a rally in front of the State House. We're holding a rally at the Capitol in, Washington, D.C. We're holding a rally on the National Mall. Where is it? What time is it going to be? So you're kind of really in a media advisory hitting on those sort of 5 W's and the H of here's what's happening, here's why it's happening, where, when, all of those things. A news release puts a little more context around that event. So that's where you're going to, have a quote from either yourself as an advocate or someone, Shelley, it could be a quote from you about why we're doing this, that X number of advocates are coming to Washington, D.C. to call on Congress to support the Comprehensive Cancer Survivorship Act. So they're just a little bit different tools that have specific purposes. A media advisory more for saying, we have this event, we hope that you'll come and cover it. The visuals are going to be awesome. That's the kind of thing I would put in an alert. You're going to see these really cool, few hundred people holding up signs or, wearing pink hats or whatever it is, that will make your event kind of visually striking.
Great. Thank you. Okay. So what happens when you're being interviewed and you think it's going to be an easy interview and you're very prepared and you have your notes, and then they ask you a really hard question that you were not expecting? And especially what if it's a controversial question, like to asking you to talk about something you weren't prepared to talk about, that, or even trying to draw you into like a political discussion?
Sure.
How do you deal with that?
So in the case of being drawn into a political discussion, I would really deflect and try to get out of it. Or if it's something that perhaps, because I'm an advocate, I don't know the ins and outs, say, of where a piece of legislation might be, where the Comprehensive Cancer Survivorship Act is in the legislative process. If it's something like that and I don't know, it is totally okay to say I don't know. and I'll get back to you. What you never want to say is no comments. Do your best to deflect. Say I don't know, or that's not something I'm prepared to talk about is even acceptable. But as soon as you say no comment, the reporter's going to feel like you're hiding something.
Right.
So you don't want to go there, but it's totally okay to deflect with an I don't know, or I'm not prepared to talk about that.
And then just pivot back to what
and
you
then
want
just
to talk
yeah,
about.
and then just move it back to we're really here to talk about the Comprehensive Cancer Survivorship Act or whatever it is to get back on track with your conversation.
Right. And I think one response to somebody trying to get you to get political, and this is the same thing you can do in Hill visits, is, cancer is not a partisan issue. It affects everyone. And then just go right back to what you're doing. Don't get sucked into it. Because sometimes that'll happen in Hill meetings too, where they want to start bashing the other party and you just don't want to get involved in it. Even if you personally agree with it, you just don't.
You don't want to go there. And especially it seems when it involves spending money. Yeah. In particular, sometimes it can get political, and you want to, not go there. Cancer is nonpartisan, and let's talk about the importance of this act and why it's important to me.
I loved your story about the local anchor, and that's so fantastic. It's great that she did it, that she did the her colonoscopy on air, but it's so amazing that she was able to find those polyps early. What is your advice on? I know that a lot of local media personalities will volunteer their time to MC events or present awards or things like that. How do you get that? How do you get them to do that? Like, do you have to have a personal connection to them, or just invite them? Or what's your advice on trying to get them engaged in your event?
So often you have to work with the station's community relations manager. I mean, if you know them, if you know the person, that's awesome. And, feel free to reach out to them directly. But oftentimes, because they have to get permission to MC your event or be part of, kicking off a race or, speaking, they're going to have to get permission from the community relations person anyway. So you could start there and just make a call and say, I'm Michael Holtz with the NCCS CPAT. I'm doing a fundraiser for, for the organization, and I would love for Lori Tucker to come and be my MC. How could, what do I have to do to make that happen?
Great. And then what about inviting elected officials to your events?
So inviting elected officials is fine, as long as they don't use the opportunity, and you have to express this to them, they cannot use the opportunity to politic, right? When they're, and members of Congress are always running for office, right? Because they get reelected every 2 years. They can't use your event as a campaign stop. Just can't. You don't want to go there because someone's going to be offended. Plus, if you're a 501c3, you're not supposed to do that anyway. So you want to make sure, it's okay for them to be there. It's even okay to let them speak, but I would personally just be really careful with that. And, you don't want it to get political. It's hard, to invite elected officials to events and it not get political these days on either side. So it's okay for them to be there. I just wouldn't necessarily give them time to speak.
And I think it depends too when you're doing it. I think if in October before the election, you run a lot more risks because they're in campaign mode. But if you're talking that it's far out from the election, you're right that they're always campaigning. But if you're talking about survivorship issues and they have a connection, there could be a legitimate reason to even give them a chance to speak, but you do, remind them you're a 501c3, it's not a political event. And if you are doing something that's anywhere close to the election, you would probably want to invite both.
For sure. Absolutely.
Running. But I think that's when I think you have to be really careful and want to stay away from it.
Yeah. And I think too, if they're, if they're a co-sponsor of, again, in this case, the Comprehensive Cancer Survivorship Act, you might want them to say why, here's why I'm co-sponsoring, and I hope that other members in the Tennessee delegation will co-sponsor it with me.
So can you talk a little bit about pitching to podcast hosts, like to get on their podcast? And also, so the question was about a couple of specific podcasts, which we don't need to talk about those specific ones, but they said that they seem to only do stories on celebrities. So how do you like find the type, if a podcast mainly focuses on celebrities, it's probably not the best fit for your topic. So how do you like research and find the podcast that might be a good fit, and how do you reach out to them?
So first of all, I would look for podcasts that are local. You know, getting on a national podcast, you know, is probably not going to happen. For example, I am a friend of Kate Bowler, who does the Everything Happens podcast that I love and adore. I have pitched being a guest on her show. I'll never be a guest on her show because, you know, I haven't risen to the level of celebrity that she has on her podcast. But if there are local podcasts, I know there are several folks who in my community manage podcasts for other people who are, you know, host locally. I would start there. I would start with what podcasts are coming out of my community, or, you know, are based in Knoxville or, you know, Paducah or wherever you are, and start there. And I know Shooting for the Moon is great, but, you know, try to find the podcast that's produced locally. Make sure that you understand what it's about, because again, celebrity podcasts probably not going to be the place to go. You know, but if it's a podcast that, you know, talks about, there's a podcast that a friend of mine produces called Turning on the Light. It's about mental health issues. That's a podcast that, you know, I might at some point pitch myself as a, you know, long-term survivor and the mental health issues involved in being a cancer survivor. Great.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. We're at the end of the hour. We really appreciate the incredible information you shared. And I just want to let people know, if you are coming to the symposium, we'll be sending out logistics information about 2 weeks ahead of time, and it'll include these documents that Michael talked about. We're waiting for the legislation to be reintroduced before we finalize all of that. So we have drafts of it, but we want to make sure that it's as up to date as possible. So we'll be sending you that 2 weeks before the symposium. And we'll be sharing it with if you are not coming to the in-person Hill Day, we will still have opportunities for you to build your relationships with your members of Congress back home in the district and in meetings at home. So we will still share that information with you as well. Thank you so much, Michael. We really appreciate it. And thanks to everybody for joining us today.